Welcome to another episode of Rupert and Pinchy. Hello, Pinchy.
Welcome. That's what it sounded like.
Welcome.
That's what it sounded like you said.
Wel- Welcome to another episode of Rupert and Pinchy. It's number nine. Number nine.
9.
Number nine. Number nine. You don't know the number nine thing. It's kind of an important number.
Why?
Well, because when there were certain things called vinyl records that people used to have, um, it people were playing them backwards to see if there was secret messages.
Yeah, I know about that. Yes.
Okay, so on a Beatle album, supposedly there was the number nine, the number nine, the number nine. If you played it backwards. So anyway,
Is that
episode number
the
nine is.
what song?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Number 9.
Number nine. Uh, so welcome to Rupert and Pinchy. So this is episode number nine. Number nine. If you play this episode backwards, we're not sure what you might hear.
Yeah. It's probably gibberish.
No, actually, experts believe it may hold a secret to the answer of the universe. But anyway,
A secret to
welcome
the answer of the universe.
Yeah, or what the answer of the secret. Anyway, welcome to episode number nine. We're really grateful for you to be here. Um,
Speak for
and
yourself.
yeah, yeah,
I'm also glad. Yes.
yeah, I know. Okay, so wow, Z, I call him Z, but Pinchy is very, very animated today because he's got the roadmap in his head, and he's going to be guiding the ship today. So I would please notice the stay in your seat and fasten your seatbelt sign above your head. Uh, and we're ready to go. So what's on your mind?
I'm not sure. That's stupid. Okay. So as first order as coroner, I've decided that we are going to discuss death, which is what being a coroner is
You're
all
really
about.
into it. Yeah. Well, and how did so then what you're telling me is that, in our last show I informed everyone that I had voted for as a writing candidate for a local coroner. I had voted Pinchy in. And apparently you heard and found out that you did win the election.
Yeah, by one vote.
Well, what's the score?
1-0?
Yeah, wow. So it was unanimous.
Yes.
You had a suit.
100% of the voters voted for me.
It's like a Venezuelan election. When the despot communist gets somehow 102% of the vote.
Well, you hear in the Russian, Soviet Union, there was an election that was 99% for the communists, and there's I don't remember if it was Stalin or who it was, but he was basically saying, this is the most democratic election of all time. It's basically what he said. And it's like, I don't know about that, but okay.
I wonder if after that election, they wanted to get, on the exit poll, and they wanted to talk with some of the people that were within the 1%. Strangely, they couldn't be found.
Yeah.
They were all missing.
Yeah.
That's what happens in those places.
Yes,
So,
but more seriously, the topic that we had decided to discuss comes from a list that we brainstormed, and we ended up just overlapping with that. We had our top 5 picks on the list, and our both of our lists had this one on it. It's called Despair or Hope, No Third Option, was basically what it said on the list. And so there's many ways that you could apply despair or hope, but I'm speaking more of salvific hope and despair. So the basic premise that plays through my head is despair should either lead you to hope or continue to despair, is basically where despair leads you. Is we all have despaired, I think. You know? Um, everything doesn't go as it should, and we are sinners. It's like that is that is very despairing, and we can get caught up in that despair and be like, well, there's nothing for me to do. But the Christian is the one that's like, well, I have that despair, but there's a way to get out of that, and that's through the hope of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically the premise. And the point that I would try to make is that the atheist looks at the world and sees despair. We all die, and that's the way of the world. So what are our two options? One, I try to live as long as possible, and two, life isn't worth living. Those are the two, I think, major turning points in an atheist, in a true atheist mind. And then the Christian, or the person that looks at the world and is like, we all die, but there's a hope at the end. This isn't it. Then, how am I supposed to live, and who am I supposed to live for? Is it myself? Because if I live for myself, it won't fulfill me, and it's not my purpose. So, basically, that's where you either hope in resurrection,
Mm-hmm.
or a new life, and either that or you despair and believe that life isn't worth living, or that you should do whatever you want in your life. So, those are basically the options. It's not like there's a third option. I mean, I just listed 3 options, but it's based on 2 paths.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
So, you said that to live for oneself will not bring fulfillment or whatever. Why do you think that is?
Well, I would say that my first inclination would be to say that man wants to live for self, and self doesn't actually fulfill when it comes to contentment. And I think it's because we weren't designed to live for ourselves, and that you see that so many people think that life is about living for oneself, but they always end up empty-handed at the end. And it's like, how does that work? But because clearly that's not how it's meant to be. Because if it was, then we would be content when we do what we want. But I honestly think that you have to say, well, I was designed by someone else, and I didn't design myself, so I can't be the end. Myself is not the final end of my needs. Because if it was, we live for another. We've been designed by another.
Well, so let me ask it a different way. Um, can you think of a being that can live for itself and be completely content?
Well, I mean, you would simply have to say that would be God, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
he is the existence itself, according to the philosophical arguments for God. And that seems to be what God is existence itself. So, the fact is, he's self-sufficient. He's truly self-sufficient. And existence doesn't exist without him. In him we we live and breathe and have our being.
Yep. So if you look at those, if you think about, okay, so God can live within himself and for himself and be completely at peace.
Right.
and then where you're positing that man, meaning men and women. I mean, why should we even have to say that? But
Right.
you know,
Mankind.
mankind. Oh, I don't want it to be mankind. Whatever.
Man and womankind.
Man and womankind and everybody kind. Mankind and womankind with blue eyes and brown eyes. No, man and womankind with
Yeah.
green eyes too. Oh, well, stop already. Can we stop already?
Yes.
And get out of kindergarten, please? Okay, so you're saying God can live for himself
Yeah.
and be perfectly content and happy. And then you're saying that man
Cannot.
cannot live for himself and be perfectly content and happy. So then you have to ask, well, what is the difference between the two, or differences between God
Right.
and man?
Well, first of all, humans are finite and are not self-sufficient, meaning they cannot exist on their own without God enabling them to do so. So the fact is, basically, man can't live for himself because he is not God. And so could you say anything except for God? Can anything except for God live for oneself? I mean, as its purpose.
Okay, so you answered, but let me ask it this way. So
We are creatures.
let's yeah, I wanted to go to the most sub level that you can think.
Right.
And so you go, okay, well, what's the difference between God, who can live for himself, and guess what? Results in happiness. And we live for ourselves, and guess what? It doesn't result in happiness. What is the main difference? As well, creature, creator.
Right.
Okay, that's one. Then it's like, and then like you said, in a lot of different um, ways, is that uh, he can provide whatever he needs to
Right.
himself.
Absolutely.
God can,
Yeah.
right? And man
Right.
can't provide. Think about it. It's startling. He can't provide anything for himself.
Right. Well, you could simply say, point to the fact that everything that lives and has its being is allowed to have that by God, and the fact is, God could end it whenever if he wanted to. I don't have to exist, and that's the thing is, I mean, we could talk about God's nature and whether or not it was inevitable that we would exist. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we don't need to exist because we can't provide for ourselves. But God is the one that is necessary to exist for everything else to exist. Meaning, only through His sovereign will and decision can we exist. And as well as everything else in creation. So that means that everything that is provided for us is not provided by to us from ourselves, but only from God.
You've heard the term "self-made man," right? He's a self-made man. Remember
I think I've heard that,
yeah. Remember, I'm trying to remember exactly the way that Chesterton put it. He says, uh, he was walking with a friend, and that person says to him, whispers to him or talks to him as they're walking along, "Wow, so and so, he's really going to make something of himself." Because he believes
in himself. Yes,
he believes in himself, and it's like, and Chesterton thought that is such a odd statement, and then he goes into discerning all the different views of that, and he came to the fact that, well, if he ends up believing in himself, then he's going to be in what's called Hanley, and Hanley was a psychiatric ward that the criminally insane or the insane were put to protect themselves and others because they truly believed in themselves.
Right.
There was a lot of Jesuses in Hanley.
Yeah.
Or Hamley, I can't remember the name of it.
Hanley. Yeah, you're right.
Of the, So
Hanwell.
so
Hanwell.
Hanwell, there you go. Hanwell. So when you think about it, in our day we'll say, "Wow, that person's a self-made man," or that
Right.
person's that woman is independently wealthy and a strong woman, and it's like, she did it on her own.
Right.
I did it my way. Anyway, so uh, what's odd about that is, like, let's just take an example. So if we think about the best basketball player in the world, we won't give any names, but let's think about the best basketball player in the world, and they think, I've really arrived. I am the best. I've done it. It's like, I would like to say, okay, first of all, I'm going to give you the title of the best of all time if you brought yourself into existence.
Right. Which you
If
can't.
if you were the one who mixed up the DNA, you took your mom's DNA and you took your dad's DNA and you said, oh, I'm if I go with the way this thing is going, I'm going to be 5'2" and 400 pounds. There is no way I'm going to be able to dunk the ball from the free throw line. So I'm going to manipulate my DNA so that I am the perfect height.
Right.
Got a really good build. Okay. So
Right.
if you did that, then maybe. And then you say, well, let's say he says he did that. Okay. Okay, you did that. Did you provide the cows that you ate? And the chickens with the eggs and
Nope.
the wheat? No. No, okay, but I'm still okay. So, did you provide the water that you drink and the air that you breathe? And
Nope.
what we find out is the self-made or self-content or self-assured. I'm not talking about confidence in the Lord,
Right.
but self-assured um,
Man.
person is living what we would call a deception.
Yep. That's the ultimate. You just pointed to the ultimate folly of rejecting God. Is the fact that it is foolish to reject the one that gives us existence. Anyway, it's like that's the problem with rejecting God at the garden is I think everyone would do that, but I'm just saying the foolish thing about that is just it's impossible for us to live for ourselves. Because, one, he has the final say in the matter, so we either go to heaven or hell, and he's the one that decides that. It's not like, based on us, our assurance in him or accepting him as our Savior. But what I'm saying is, it's not like we can be like, oh, I'm going to live for myself, and I'm going to beat God in the end. It's like, or I'm going to sit there on the judgment day, I'm going to make all these excuses, and I'm going to win. It's like, what fools are we that the Creator, that we think that we can defeat the Creator? It's like, that's just not how it works. I'm sorry.
Well,
You could be just
yeah.
snap his fingers and you're gone. It's like, but it's more permanent than that. It's hell, even. He's not going to snap you out of existence. He's going to give you what you wanted, and that's unfortunate.
Well, and I want to get to a couple things, but on one thing. So, you and I talk about how we exist because God subsists. He maintains us every moment of every day, and therefore we exist. Also, it's important to recognize that once He decided, another difference between God and man.
Yeah.
God is eternal. We're immortal. The main difference is one's eternal, one's immortal. That's what I'm going with. Now, when we mean
That's
eternal, always was, beyond time,
right.
outside of time, explains itself, eternal. Those things that are immortal. So, for
Have a
example,
beginning.
correct. It would be strange to call because it would be strange and inaccurate to call that God is immortal.
Right.
I mean, descriptively, if you say, well, he can't die,
Right.
but
he doesn't even have the capacity to die.
That
Except as
does,
Jesus,
yeah,
obviously.
because he is the yes. He is always the yes. He is always the life.
Right.
He always is. He's perfect in himself. So we're immortal, which means that we once he decided to make Adam and Eve and create us, it was a done deal. He wasn't ever going to go back and just go like, yeah, poof, I'm going to blow those people into non-existence. Right. It's no.
He already made his decision.
Yeah, it was a commit. It was an infinite, and because he's eternal, you could say it was which the mind starts to get melted as you think through these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was an eternal decision,
right,
about the immortality of his creation.
Right.
And yet immortality is not the same as eternal.
Right.
Well, and yet it was the eternal decision. Future. Yeah. So the eternal so we're immortal, but there was a time that we weren't. That is really strange.
Right. That's the weird thing about God is like we would be like, well, if time didn't exist before God made it, then how did he make the decision to make us? And how is it possible that he lived eternally in the past? Like infinitely in the past. It doesn't make sense to us. The other thing that I just thought of when you're talking about that is I was just thinking about Jesus and how Jesus, his existence, his essence, existed eternally in the past. His physical body, though, was made. His right. physical body was made. And so it's interesting to think about how Jesus, even though he was a man, he's an eternal. He's eternal. He's not immortal. He is actually eternal. I was just contemplating a question is, could you say that Jesus' mortal body died, but that his godness didn't die, right?
Right.
That it was his physical body that died, right? And right. So that's an interesting thing to think, is that his body was, but then it was resurrected, so I guess it's...
I don't know. Okay, so Jesus came and in the flesh. God came in the flesh. God could not sacrifice himself in heaven or in eternity,
right?
Separated from being attached to the creation. He loved us the same before Christ came.
Right.
He loved us the same when Christ came, and he loved us the same when Christ left. It's not, what does it, Scripture say, that the love of God was manifest?
Right.
It was always there.
Right.
But now it was where we could touch and feel it.
Mm-hmm.
But a sacrifice was needed because of our fall and the rejection of God and the rejection of reality. And we wanted to be our own God, and we sold ourselves out to the archangel, the devil, mm-hmm. Satan. And it was necessary for a man. It was necessary in time, because that sin occurred in time.
Right.
That fall occurred in time. And so it was not going to be solved outside of time.
Right. And so would you say that the main difference between him saving us not physically versus saving us physically, I mean in this mortal world, would you say that, maybe he could have done it, but it wouldn't be sacrifice?
What do you mean?
It wouldn't be sacrifice.
What do you mean he could have done it?
Okay.
God,
If
when you say
if the nature of
God could
things,
have. Let me rephrase and tell me if this is what you're asking. Are you asking could God have saved us or redeemed us without coming in the flesh?
that's kind of what I'm saying. But
Is that your question?
what
Okay.
I'm really saying
Mm-hmm.
is the only way that that could happen is if our nature was different, if the nature of things was different. But because of the way the things are, a sacrifice would have to be made for
Mm-hmm.
his creation, right?
Right. Well, the church fathers say it as best as can be said. They um, they don't try to go into the reasonings of why God may or may have done
Right.
something, but they say it was most fitting that God would decide to come in the flesh, and when they say most fitting, you have to go back to what was what was the purpose of God creating man in the first
Right.
place,
Yeah, that's a good question.
right?
Yeah.
So, um, God, there we're not, that's not for this show, but God had a purpose for creating man, and He had a telos. He had a purpose for man himself,
Right.
and a immortal purpose, an eternal purpose brought into space and time, encapsulated in our human bodies. He has a purpose for me that now becomes immortal and forever. And so, yeah, God could have gone from heaven and gone like, yeah,
Right.
I'm just gonna gloss over Adam's sin and make him. I'm gonna make him a supercomputer. You know,
Yeah.
he was only a calculator before he messed up. I'm gonna just wave my hand and make him a
Right.
supercomputer. Because according to some, man has no free will. So, uh,
Uh,
God chose not to do that. He
right.
thought he thought man fell in time, sinned in time. The most fitting way to correct that, so it's a truly healthy living man, is to go in time and do it through man.
Right. So the thing to me is that's one problem with believing that we don't have free will is I think that by the nature of things, free will is what separates us or brings us to God. Is whether or not I choose him or I don't. And it ultimately goes back to the relationships that we talked about last week. Is
Mm-hmm.
you know, all of these are pointing to our relationship with God, the family, uh, marriages, friendship, brotherhood, fatherhood. All these things are relationships and require sacrifice for these to be real. To have a real
Mm-hmm.
friend, you sacrifice your own needs and your own wants for their well-being, and it's like this is all pointing to a supernatural reality, and that's why I think the one thing you had to say is, well, what was severed in the garden? Our relationship with God. What
Mm-hmm.
was how how was how was redemption won by Jesus? Through repairing that relationship, which is sacrifice, which is what all these relationships are pointing to, is that ultimately sacrifice seems to be, or love seems to be the purpose of all these relationships, and ultimately our relationship with God as well.
Mm-hmm. So
Action.
you look at when we talk about free will, sometimes we get it wrong. There's a heresy called Pelagianism
Right.
or semi-Pelagianism, and that's basically that we pull the essence of that heresy is that we pull ourselves up through our own bootstraps,
Right. Through our own, yeah.
through our own efforts,
Right.
and whereas the amazing free will, and when we talk about that, there has got to be some action from our part
Right.
as free moral agents And we're free moral agents, not self-produced.
Right.
We're produced from the creator of all.
Right.
But he chose to make us free moral agents and to use our will to, in his humility, accept him.
Right. Yeah.
How dare we reject him? He caused us, he created us, but he still gives us that right. But what happens is people feel like free will is like some really huge, strong force.
Right. Right.
Okay? It grows, our will is to grow strong in connection and to be fixed on God.
Right.
But that will that chooses, that acquiesces, that accepts God's free gift is really slight.
Right.
It's not like we did some weightlifting on free will and then we're like, all right, God, I'm ready to choose this thing. He's like, right?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way.
In reality, it's never that way.
Right.
Because
no, I'm just saying the misconception. It doesn't. Why does it have to be?
Oh, you mean like lift? No, it's God. He always compares himself or portrays himself as a father, and we as children.
Yes.
And children don't know how to mow the lawn right. Okay?
Right. So
they don't know how to clean their room right. They don't know how to do all these things. And so the father will say, son or daughter, I'd like you to mow the lawn. And they go out there and they mow the lawn. At that point, they go, all right, I'm going to go mow the lawn.
Mow the lawn.
Mow the lawn. And they do a terrible job. And the father doesn't come along and say, and whack them and go like, all right, you're not saved. You didn't mow the lawn right. You know?
Right.
No. He's like,
here's
all right,
how to do it.
You obeyed me.
Oh.
You listened to my voice. Yeah. You chose to listen to my voice.
Right.
Okay? Now, 30 years later, your lawn mowing talent better be better. Okay? But that's our free will is just, yes, Lord. Yes. And when you were talking about despair and hope.
Yep.
You know, when we think of, it'd be good to pull up perhaps the definition of despair. But there's a line in Anne of Green Gables where Anne is like, she's a very melodramatic young teenager, and she's lamenting, "Oh, I'm despairing of life," and her Marilla, the woman who adopted her, says, basically, "Hush, girl. To despair of life is to have no hope, and to have no hope is to be damned." And so when when we're talking about despair and hope, when you're in despair, to stay in despair,
oh, absolutely,
becomes when you own it.
Mm-hmm.
But losing of hope or weak hope is not despair. Wouldn't you say?
Well, I mean, what is weak hope then?
Weak hope.
Right.
Despair, true despair. Judas despaired.
Yes, I see what you mean. I see what you mean.
Okay.
It should have brought him to repentance. That's basically the idea is that despair should lead us to repentance. We shouldn't dwell in despair because that ultimately is what destroys us. And part of this is, I think that's what logical argument should be used for, is to be able to be like, there's nowhere I can hide from God. Nothing I believe makes any sense. and
Mm-hmm.
the way that I'm going to reject it is through my emotions and through my unwillingness to look at the facts. It's like I will do anything to run from him, and that's when you're like, I will die. I'm going to die someday. And
Mm-hmm.
what do? You live selfishly in the way that you want to live without God. It's like
Right.
in the end, it leads me to death if I do what
Well,
I
oh,
want.
so let me ask you a question. And I want you to think about the four levels of growing in virtue.
Yes,
You have pure vice, vice with discomfort, virtue with discomfort,
virtue and
virtue with
pleasure.
joy,
Yeah,
with pleasure. So I want you to think of this. If you think if somebody thinks they're in despair
right.
and they're pained by it, do you think they're in despair? The true definition of despair.
Probably not because they're wanting to leave it.
Or yeah, they're unsettled by it, they're in pain.
Right.
So many times we think of when somebody says they're despairing of any hope, okay, that comment or oh that person is so despaired. It's like no, true despair is when you set aside truth and you decide to live where you're at.
A
And
despairing life.
it might be very pleasurable.
Right. Right.
Let's say you despair of ever coming to God. So like you said at the very beginning of the show, what do you value then? This life.
Mm-hmm. Because all
Living
you
as
have.
long as you can. Yeah. Having as much fun as you can. And so sometimes we look at, when we think of despair, we think that person, we automatically think they're going to be uncomfortable. It's like,
Right.
no.
Not necessarily.
They've accepted
The despair.
that the 80 plus years that they might have on this earth is all they have. And that there's no hope to believe in something more. Might as well enjoy it. And they're denying reality.
Right. Well,
Because, first of all, go ahead.
well, it's kind of like if I get shot by a bullet and I'm like, and I just ignore it. At some point, I'm gonna die, but I'm just
Mm-hmm.
ignoring it. It's like I'll
Mm-hmm.
be fine, and you just ignore it. You don't like notice it. You don't pay attention, and then in the end, it kills you. It's like that's just how it works. It's like I just set aside God for now, and then when it's too late, then I'll be like ask for God's help, and it will be too late because I already made up my mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's funny, once you accept a lie, or once you accept some unreality, it's not over. It leads to the next step of denying another reality.
Right.
So,
Well, I
let's
think
say you're the.
another
Go
example
ahead.
I have just is if I ignore the reality of gravity, I end up killing myself if I jump off a building. It's like gravity doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, and then you end up jumping off the building and you die. It's like that's kind of
Right,
what it's like. Is oh the hill's not too steep, and then you start going down the hill, and you're
right,
already going straight down.
right, right. So, yeah, exactly. So if you let's say a person goes like, okay, I don't believe that there's a God, and coming back to what we were starting with in the beginning, of
Right.
course, we know that the scripture says, what does it say? The fool in his heart
Says there is no God.
says there is no God. Now, the reason he's a fool is because he's saying in his heart that there is no God.
Right.
It
That's
wasn't
where foolishness comes from.
right. And then it says, and it's not like, okay, there's fools out there and go ahead and ask them, but they're going to say there's no God. That's what makes them fools. It's like, no, you're getting the cart before the horse, or
Oh,
the
right.
chicken before the egg. It's one of those mind blowing things. It's like, no, they've rejected God.
Yes.
Then they became foolish in their hearts, is what Romans says. But let's go to the so let's say the fool says in his heart there is no God. So they go, well, there is no God, so I might as well live. I have 80 years roughly, possibly, to do whatever I want and enjoy and have all the pleasure I want.
I'm gonna start the timer.
Yeah, start the timer. And then as time goes on, wisdom, or at least the voice of wisdom, or at least the shadow of wisdom, creeps in a little bit, and it's like, wow, that person died when they're 20. I'm 20. And you think,
I could die now.
I could die now. And all of a sudden, the desperation level increases. But that's not what I want to point out. The fact that, okay, you deny there's a God, but then you start to think, so you deny that reality, and then you go like, okay, I'm going to live for 80 years, and then I'm going to die. Now you're going to deny the next reality that's going to cause you a problem. And that this denial of this next reality could help you get back to the first one.
Right.
It's like you're going to deny, well, living 80 years and then dying, there's no point. What's the point of that?
Right.
There's no point. If you deny that there is no point to just living 80 years and dying, that's your second level of denying. That's your second step of denying. But that second step can, like you were saying, that second step should bring you to like
repentance,
despairing, and the opportunity for hope to grow.
Right.
Right? One of the two.
Right, absolutely. And that's the thing is they say that there is no God, and the way that they come to that conclusion is, I don't want to follow God, so he must not exist. That's really the argument. And like I said about logic, is that's what it seems like logic is good for, is like, there's nowhere you can hide. That because in the end, there's a reckoning from God, and so there's no way you can hide, and so the rejection of God like that, and then yes, you've been given multiple opportunities to turn until the end, like we talked about last week. It's like we've been given opportunities. Turn back before it's too late. But there will be a day when it is too late, when we've already made up our minds, and it's like, so get out of despair.
Right.
Bring hope, or have hope. It's like, this is something that people talk about. Sin can either make you want to hide or make you fess up or repent. It's like, I can't handle this on my own, so I must repent and ask for help and forgiveness. It's like, I don't do what I want to do, but I ask for forgiveness.
I press on towards the high calling.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't give up. I keep running.
You don't give up, do you?
Right. You don't give up, do you? So, sometimes the challenge we can all slip into this, but for people that are trying to decide, well, is there a God or is there not a God? And, they're being told about Jesus, and they're like, they take on the burden. They think they have to prove God to themselves before it would be right and honest and reasonable to accept.
Right.
That's an impossible task. Only God can do that. You and I, that's why a lot of times the proofs of God that we have, the philosophical, the metaphysical, and the logical proofs of God, they're what's called I can't think of the Italian term. It's via, little ways, little via, piquito via. They're little ways to show a picture of the real thing. They're not, but it's not capable. Only God can show who God is.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's why these don't work. To people, it's not because they're not logical. It's because they're not willing to listen.
we should say it doesn't work for some.
Oh, yeah, that's why
Right.
it
Yeah.
seems to not work a lot in people's eyes.
Right.
It's just like,
Right.
well, is that really what they're looking for? Is that Are they rejecting it because it's bad arguments, or are they rejecting it because they don't want to accept it?
Well, yeah. Well, both, but yeah, both reasons. But I mean, that's our condition because when Adam and Eve chose to believe the
A
lie of the
lie, yeah.
devil versus the truth of the Lord, it put a bent in in all humanity till the very end that there's a tendency for independence. There's a tendency for wanting to go your own way. So, coming back though to those.
Before we move on to there, I just want to give a simple analogy that I just thought of. Is like, so let's say that we're Adam and Eve at the garden. What they do is they empty their glasses, their water glasses, and all their offspring after that have empty glasses. And basically, they spend all their life trying to fill the glass, and God fills it and overflows it with those that believe in Him. So basically, we gave up our freedom, which is the water, and then all of humanity after that receives that as its inheritance, is nothing. They receive that cup, but none of the water. And then God, through God's wisdom and goodness, pursuing God, we receive more water in the glass. But that's why Jesus had to fill it.
Well, and the thing is, okay, so in the garden they were enlightened. They were in the light.
Right.
They freely chose to walk into the darkness. Okay? It didn't take a lot of intellect to see the difference between the two. They weren't stepping into the unknown. So now it's reversed. And Christ came to help it and solve the problem.
Right, yeah.
But we're leaving from darkness
to light.
Into the light.
Right.
And so it always takes a step of
faith.
Because we're in darkness. Now, but let's go back to your thing about
despair and hope, or what?
Yeah, well, the proofs of God and why. Okay, so the thing is, we give a lot of people little vias, little ways to maybe jog the thought process.
Right.
But it's not something. There's two things that have to happen, and we know as if we're properly catechized Christians, we'll know that a couple things have to happen. When the truth is being presented to us, there has to be a movement in our will towards the truth.
Right. A seeking.
Okay? A seeking. That step of faith. Okay? It's so funny when someone says, well, we're saved by, when they say we're saved by faith alone or grace alone, it's like, yeah, and there's no act on our part. It's like, okay, wait a minute.
Who has
faith? The faith? No, who has the faith? Is it God's faith?
Right.
No, it's our faith. So, your act of faith is an act.
That's why I asked what is faith, because
it's an action. The belief.
Yeah, it is an action. It's an act of the will. Yeah.
It's always
because you have to yield to God,
Yeah. So the Christian knows, because see, non-Christians kind of like it's not a paradox, but it's like, a fish knows. Does a fish know they're in water?
Doesn't seem like it.
Probably not.
No.
They probably don't. Because they're just used to. But anyway, it's like, okay, so there's something hidden in room number A. Number A, letter A. There's
Number
three
A.
rooms. Letter A, letter B, letter C. It's like behind door number A is number A again? Letter A. Behind door letter A is something, and behind door letter B is something. Behind door letter C is something, and you're like, oh. And someone on the inside can tell you if they can't say, let's say they're told that okay, you can't say what it is. We've all played this game, and so there's a Bengal tiger in there, and they're like, it's soft. Well, what's soft mean? I don't know. It's furry. It's got nails and it's got teeth, and so the person's trying to figure out what's in it, and they can't quite know.
Right.
So then they have to go in to room A and go, oh, it's a tiger. And so until you get into that room,
right,
all of a sudden the lights come on, but you still have to walk through that door.
Right. Right.
Okay.
And that's an interesting thing also is, in that example, you can't know until you get there because they're giving you descriptions, but it doesn't necessarily, like, they're not exactly telling you what the tiger is. And you got to figure it out. And similar to some things can't be known until you know it. It's something that happens all the time in people's minds. Is like, or in my mind, a lot of the times it's an aha moment. Like, I didn't know that. I couldn't have guessed it. I only could see it if I saw it, which is kind of a paradox.
It's an unfair, yeah. But you feel so unfair to say that. So there's okay. So so we know that it takes the scripture or the truth, the gospel has to be preached, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And then there's a hearer that's listening, and it presents a problem to them. Basically, the gospel is saying, you're close, very close to despair.
Mm-hmm.
But there's an answer.
Right.
The gospel is trying to make things real for the person so that they can make the leap of faith.
Right.
And so they're, go ahead.
Right. It makes it harder for them to run. It's like, it's getting closer to you, and you realize, I can't escape it. I can't escape the truth.
I can't escape death. So we know that it takes a movement of the will, and it takes a grace from God.
Absolutely.
And that grace from God is extended to everybody. And we're not going to go into other areas of theology right now on irresistible grace and different things. That's for another time. But
well, can I just say something really simple?
Yeah.
Is mankind is being brought back to Christ, and so I think that, or to God, and that's why it's necessary to say that the grace has been extended to everyone. That's all I'm going to say. That's just the simple thing I'm going to say.
Yeah, well, that's fine. So it takes that, but okay, so it's important to take distractions and come to that final, to quiet down the noise, to hear to get to the point of being weak in hope or having no hope, but not truly in despair. This despair is a choice that you accept and you walk through the door. But so they're brought to that choice of going like, okay, I am going to die in 80 years. What is the point?
Right.
That is when hope is the loudest.
Right. This isn't it. This isn't all of life.
And someone will say, well, that's why I say the movement to faith can be so small. If it's simply, you're despairing, you're like, gosh, I'm going to die in 80 years. What's the point?
Right.
It could be just like, well, maybe there's something else.
Right. Maybe
Boom.
there's a point.
That's like a nuclear bomb going off. It's like that could pave the way toward faith. Because what does it say? Faith is the conviction of things not seen.
The hope.
Or faith. Faith. Read it or say
Read
it.
it.
Yeah,
Faith is the
by
conviction
memory, because
of.
I can't do that. I mean, I don't want to do that. I don't want to prove that I can do it.
I don't remember.
You can't. I don't need it. I know it if I just think about it. Faith is the evidence of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Faith is the evidence
Mm-hmm.
of the things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And so once you go like, well, maybe it's not. Hope is screaming really loud, extending a hand,
Right.
and that's why I say sometimes we as Christians, and sometimes as the person that doesn't have quite the faith yet, they feel that they have to convince themselves, like they do with an equation 2 + 2 = 4. No, you can't. You can't convince yourself of God. Only God can convince himself of God, which he does it eternally and has always done it, and really doesn't need to do it because he is full and true and known in himself perfectly. Okay? But he makes himself known
Yes.
to us.
Right.
We don't go and say, okay, I'm going to go look for. So if someone will say, well, you know what? I see what you're saying. I am going to die in 80 years. Or less. I have friends that died, right? And there's no point in it if I'm just going to die. There's some hope in me. And you're telling me that God will prove to me that he exists so that I can have faith. And you can say, yep, he will. If you ask him.
Right.
If you're willing to ask him. And some people won't even go that far. They won't, I'm not willing to ask. Yeah,
right.
Whatever. But, okay. Well, how is he going to do it? They'll go, well, how is he going to show me? It's like, just ask him. I don't know how he's going to do it. Some people he does it this way. Some people he does it that way. But one thing you can say is like, just start thinking about creation. Why is it there?
Right.
Why is it ordered?
How is it possible?
How is it possible? So, we're not talking about worshiping creation.
Right.
We're talking about recognizing that creation, or what we say is creation, or the natural world, is not a cause in itself.
Right. It didn't cause itself. It didn't just come to be.
Yeah. It's ordered. My organized bedroom is not organized because that's how I purchased it.
How it was, right.
How it was, right? I have to continue to maintain it. So, I don't know if I'm getting off the topic.
No, you're not. You're actually getting to a really good point, though, is like an art piece is like, you wouldn't just say, oh, that happened. Like some paints just came together and formed a painting. You look at it and you're like, there's a design behind that. There's something created that. And like I was talking about the friendships, like, and relationships pointing to a greater sacrifice, it's like, everything we do, music, art, all the creative things that we do, we look at it and we're like, somebody created something. Somebody created that table saw. Somebody created that painting. And I think it's supposed to point us to Christ, or to God. It's like, well, we see every example of something that is designed, like letters, words, all the stuff, by other people. We're like, what? How do we have this capacity, and where does it come from? Where does this intelligence come from? Like, oh, there's a greater intelligence, and that is God, who created everything. And so, this is really, I think God has made himself known, and that's the thing, is that's why everyone's been given given a grace. That's a type of grace, wouldn't you say? Right. Creation itself is a type of grace. In a way.
Well, and yep, it's a sign or a proof.
Right.
the grace is a supernatural thing,
Right.
but
Right.
but yeah, it's but we can resist it.
Right.
You know,
It's like, oh, it
uh,
could just happen.
yeah, we can
It doesn't
resist
make
that
any.
fact.
Right. Yeah.
But in a sense, the truth of God is kind of like um, a warm summer day.
Right.
You get up in the morning, you go out and sit on your chair outside. You start to get warmer and warmer. Your skin starts to tan, maybe, perhaps, or burn in your case. and uh, and the street, the wind starts to blow, and all it's slowly. You can't ignore it. It's right there,
Right.
and that's why when we say, and we have said in past things, when we say religion the is natural to man,
Right.
because just like water is natural to a fish.
Right.
Okay, when you have people on a remote island, you know, having children, raising them, hunting, foraging, building huts or homes, building canoes or whatever, um, they start to unknowingly, unaware almost, it happens to all of us in different ways, that there's a cause for this canoe, there's a cause for my wife, there's a cause for our children, there's a cause for this hut, there's a cause for. I wonder if there's a cause for the waves lapping on the shore. Is there a cause for the moon that I see in the sky? All of a sudden, these causes start to. They're working. They're
Right.
teaching us cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect.
Right.
And so that's why when we say that religion is natural to man, did not did not Paul say that in Romans? Did he not? When he said, "Behold, they are without excuse,
Right.
because the heavens declare the power of God." You know, if we went and read it, it declares all these things.
Yeah.
And someone will say, "Yeah, well, that's God declaring it." But God made the man who can hear and see and use the intellect and the reason to process that those things declare the wisdom of God, the power of God.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what we mean when we say it's natural.
Yeah. Well,
Anyway,
it definitely is, because everything has a cause. That's the. I mean, not everything. If you're going to the argument, but I'm just saying, everything that we see has a cause of some kind.
well, and you know what? Sometimes, well, not sometimes, a lot of times, we in the Christian world have portrayed Christ and the Spirit and the movement of God to such an extent that this poor honest person goes like, "Well, I haven't had a vision, or God didn't appear to me and
Right.
uh, do this miraculous thing." It's like that's not the way it's normally done.
Right.
If I just take three quick examples of somebody that had a vision, in each case, it wasn't a pleasant experience. When Saul was thrown off his horse, when Balaam was rebuked by his donkey, right? When, and you can probably think of examples, when Belshazzar was rebuked by a hand drawing on the side of a wall from heaven.
Right.
All these events were not those really cool things that led those people to just. I mean, it wasn't. It wasn't a positive thing. Let's say, okay.
Right.
So we as Christians, or Christendom, have spiritualized, spiritized something that is not natural to God in His way.
Right.
And that is, God reaches man through the ears and the eyes, and in the intellect and the reason, the soul that He gave him.
Absolutely.
The proof will be Not that he turns water into wine, but that the stars in the heavens reflect his glory.
Right.
But we keep focusing with people that there's got to be some kind of mystic experience.
A vision. Yeah.
It's like you are able to. It's like
you can discern
you take
without
your friend
that.
aside and it's like you can discern without that. And in fact, your faith will be stronger if you do.
Or one hour and 6 minutes.
1 hour and 6. Remember when Jesus said, "Behold, I haven't seen such faith like this in all of Israel." What was he commenting on? He was commenting on the fact that Roman centurion soldier said that, "Just say the word, I trust you."
Right.
He didn't have to see.
Right.
He said that faith is great.
Right. He believed in enough to not be like prove yourself. It's like, I know that he can do it. He'll do it.
So sometimes if we have friends or we have family or we have people that we know, if you're out there listening, you think like, I'm just having trouble believing. That's okay. Just stop and go like, I want to do what's right. God, if you're there, help me understand. And you have the ability to discern it.
Yeah.
You do not have to go to 15 years of Bible school or theology
to find
school. Theology school? School of theology. Those things are good. Yeah. But and those things are necessary, but that's not what is needed for you. You can start trusting that you can tell what is hot and cold. You can tell what is nighttime and daytime. You can tell what is 2 + 2.
Right, yeah.
You can tell that the house that you live in didn't just happen. Start there.
That's a good place to start, and that's a good place for us to end.
Okay.
So
hopefully I didn't distract from the roadmap that you were on. Okay.
You absolutely were right on, spot on with all the points.
Where you wanted to go?
Yeah, okay. Absolutely. And you also brought us back to the subject a couple of times, so thank you for that.
Oh. That's unusual for me. All right, well, thank you all for being here
yes.
And taking your time and to listen to us. And please give us a thumbs up or thumbs down if you'd like. If you don't like, we'd always say it before that we don't care. But
also subscribe if you're interested, and leave us a comment if you have any suggestions about topics. Any comments, that would be appreciated.
Yeah. So with that, Pinchy, adios, amigos.
Adios. Have a good week.
Espanol, piquito Espanol. Very small amount of Spanish.
Sí.
Lo siento, mi amigo. All right. Godspeed.
Have a good week.
10-4.